In an emergency, it can be hard to know who is most in need of assistance and when. Reaching the right people requires good targeting based on assessments, which usually takes place at 3 levels: the geographic, community, and individual level.
From our perspective, targeting is, in terms of right place, we actually talking about geographical targeting. In terms of right people, it's at 2 levels: the right communities that we are working with and the right individuals or households that we are working with. At that level, we are talking about individual or household level targeting. Many tools are out there with different functions which can actually help us target at the geographical level, at the community level, as well as at the individual level. And we need to be aware of those tools to be able to use them to improve our targeting.
In some emergencies, the right time means responding as soon as possible to prevent the situation from deteriorating.
In a rapid onset crisis, it's obviously much more difficult, but then we really need to start prevention and treatment as soon as possible. And again, in most rapid onsets, we don't want to wait until we see high levels of GAM, but just move in with a blanket supplementary feeding program. If we can't do both treatment and prevention because of capacity limitations or because of the situation, we should focus largely on prevention. Because we can reach many more children, and we provide that protective mechanism for children and for a broader number of children than focusing just on the small percentage of children who may actually have acute malnutrition at the start of the crisis.
A normal situation or a protracted situation, the seasonality is always there. An emergency situation is generally defined by a shock that occurs. That shock will create a kind of disruption. But depending on the season during which it occurs, the impact might not be the same, in the sense that let's take the example of a flood. A flood occurring after the harvest is not a big deal so long as the food stocks are not disrupted. But a flood occurring before the harvest, when we are in the planting season and everything is swiped away, will definitely have a dire consequence on people.
In order for a prevention intervention to work, we really need to be in place several months before the crisis actually hits. So in a slow onset, if we know that the drought is going to start having an impact in June, our prevention activities should really be in place already in April, because that then gives children a very good nutrient reserve, so that when the crisis begins to hit, they have a good defense mechanism against illness and against the lack of nutrients that might then become part of the crisis. Generally, we see wasting, which when we measured by weight for height, we see that because of a result of illness, not necessarily a result of food insecurity. So what happens is that children get malnourished, but not visibly malnourished, so they become micronutrient deficient, and then they become ill. And that illness then lasts for weeks and weeks, and that's what makes them malnourished, severely malnourished, and increases their risk of mortality. So if we can fix the front end of that and make sure that children are nutritionally strong and resilient at the beginning of the crisis, then in fact we can prevent the illness from becoming severe, and then we can prevent the resulting mortality from that.
The right time also means thinking about the longer-term strategy and how to move out of the emergency phase.
When looking at natural disasters, I think there's a more likely chance that you'll be able to predict the time frame in which you can plan a transition, so that you can begin to look at how you link with partners during the initial phases of response, and what kinds of programs you need, and then to move beyond that and begin to look at how you can bring in all the various elements of a response that would complement one another to address the consequences of that shock or that emergency on a population over the longer term, and hopefully restore populations to a better place than they were before the emergency, which I think brings us back to this whole false dichotomy between the development approach and emergency approach, which the resilience agenda seeks to address. In general, if we have highly vulnerable populations that are susceptible to shocks, we should be trying to address that vulnerability prior to a shock and following a shock.
Reaching the right people at the right time is the key to ensuring that our interventions are efficient and have an impact on reducing hunger.